waiting for your Wi-Fi to reconnect is unbearable? Try being strapped to a wooden frame while two executioners slowly turn cranks that literally tear your skeleton apart joint by joint while a crowd of your neighbors watches and eats lunch. Welcome to the rack, the medieval torture device so effective that strong men would confess to witchcraft, treason, or literally anything after just 5 minutes. And here's the thing that'll make your skin crawl. You wouldn't pass out. The human body is designed to keep you painfully, horrifically conscious through the entire ordeal. Today, we're climbing onto history's most infamous torture device, and I promise you, by the end of this video, you'll never complain about a backache again. Before we dive into this nightmare, do something for me. If you believe history isn't just dates and dead kings, but the raw, terrifying, bone-cracking truth of human existence, smash that like button. Subscribe because we're not just reciting facts, we're uncovering what they didn't teach you in school. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from, and if you think you could last more than 5 minutes on the rack. Now, let's descend into the most scientifically efficient pain machine ever invented. Let's start with the basics because understanding exactly how the rack works makes it so much worse. Picture a wooden bed frame, about 7 feet long. Seems innocent enough, right? At each end, there's a roller with attached ropes. Your wrists get tied to one roller, your ankles to the other. Then the interrogator, let's call him what he really was, a professional human breaker, would turn a crank, slowly, methodically, and your body would start to stretch. Now, here's where your high school biology actually becomes terrifying. The human skeleton is held together by ligaments, tendons, and cartilage that have very specific breaking points. The rack exploited every single one of them. As the tension increased, your shoulders would be the first to go. That distinctive popping sound you hear when you crack your knuckles? Imagine that, but with your entire shoulder socket separating from the joint. According to records from the Tower of London, where the rack was used extensively during the 16th century, the sound could be heard from the corridor outside. But you wouldn't pass out. That's the thing that makes the rack uniquely awful. Your body would flood with adrenaline, keeping you conscious and aware of every millimeter your spine was elongating. Witnesses described victims' faces turning purple, veins bulging in their foreheads, eyes nearly popping from their sockets. One account from 1558 describes how a suspected heretic named Thomas Cottam could feel his ribs separating from his sternum. He said it felt like his chest was being unzipped from the inside. Imagine being so stretched out that you could feel the individual vertebrae in your spine separating, not breaking. That would almost be merciful. No, just slowly pulling apart millimeter by agonizing millimeter until the cartilage between them started to tear like overcooked meat. The rack was essentially a medieval taffy puller, except the taffy was your connective tissue, and it screamed. The worst part? The rack was considered one of the clean torture methods. No blood, no visible wounds, no mess to clean up. Just a human being systematically deconstructed at the joints. The Tower of London's rack was even given a nickname by the executioners who operated it. The Duke of Exeter's daughter, named after the Duke who introduced it to England in 1447. They had such a good time with it, they gave it a cute name. Let that sink in. Now let's talk about what happens to your body minute by minute, because the rack's effectiveness wasn't accidental. It was engineered with a terrifying understanding of human anatomy. Minute 1. As the ropes tighten and your body begins to stretch, you'd feel what victims described as a deep wrongness. Your brain knows something catastrophically bad is happening, but the pain hasn't fully registered yet. Your muscles would tense up instinctively, trying to resist, which actually makes everything worse. Minutes 2 to 3, the shoulders start their separation. The rotator cuff begins to tear. According to Guy de Chauliac, a 14th century French physician who documented torture injuries, victims often heard a sound like green wood breaking. Your shoulder joint would start sliding out of the socket, not dislocating cleanly like in a sports injury, but slowly grinding against the socket's edge. Here's where it gets medically fascinating and absolutely horrific. The human arm can stretch about 4 inches beyond its normal length before permanent damage occurs. The legs? About 6 inches. The rack exploited this differential. Operators learned through trial and error that if you stretch the legs faster than the arms, victims stayed conscious longer. More pain, longer confessions, better results. Minutes 4 to 5, your hip joints would begin the same process. Anne Askew, a Protestant reformer, was racked so severely at the Tower of London in 1546 that she had to be carried to her execution in a chair because she could no longer walk. When the Lord Chancellor Thomas Wriothesley took over the cranks himself, he stretched Askew so far that witnesses said she was a foot longer than God made her. But real genius, and I use that word in the most twisted sense, was in the spine. The rack didn't break your back. Breaking would be too quick. Instead, It stretched the spinal column until the intervertebral discs would bulge and herniate. You'd feel your spine elongating, like someone was pulling your head away from your tailbone with invisible hooks. Victims described feeling like they were being turned into a rope. The pain wasn't sharp, it was deep, crushing, all-consuming. Your nerve endings would fire continuously, sending signals to your brain that essentially translated to, "Everything is wrong, make it stop." But your brain couldn't make it stop. You were helpless. One chronicler from the Spanish Inquisition described a man whose screaming was so loud that guards stuffed wool in his mouth, not to be merciful, to muffle the noise so he wouldn't disturb the priests eating dinner upstairs. Medieval HR, keeping the workplace comfortable since 1478. Now here's the part that transforms the rack from merely horrific to genuinely dystopian. It was incredibly effective at extracting confessions. We're talking a near 100% success rate. Take Edmund Campion, a Jesuit priest arrested in England in 1581. He was racked 3 times over 4 days. After the first session, he couldn't walk. After the second, he couldn't lift his arms to feed himself. After the third, when brought to trial, he couldn't raise his hand to take the oath. The court clerk had to lift his arm for him. And he confessed to plotting against Queen Elizabeth, to conspiring with foreign powers, to crimes he almost certainly didn't commit. Why? Because when the interrogator asked, "Shall we go another turn?" Campion's body answered before his mind could. The rack created what we'd now recognize as false confessions at an industrial scale. But here's the twisted logic. Medieval legal systems didn't care. Under Roman law, which influenced most European legal codes, a confession was the queen of proofs. Torture was literally built into the legal process. If you were accused of a serious crime, the rack wasn't an abuse of the system. It was the system. In 1252, Pope Innocent IV issued a papal bull authorizing torture during investigations, provided it didn't cause permanent injury or death. Read that again. Torture was fine, as long as you didn't break the person too badly. The rack, with its adjustable tension and reversible damage, fit perfectly within these guidelines. Magistrates would keep detailed records. How many turns of the crank? What questions were asked? These weren't madmen in dungeons. These were lawyers, clerics, educated professionals treating human destruction as paperwork. The Duchy of Württemberg actually published a torture manual in 1657 with helpful diagrams of rack positioning. It was like an IKEA instruction manual, except instead of assembling furniture, you were disassembling human beings. And it wasn't just used on the obviously guilty. The rack was deployed against religious dissidents, political rivals, suspected witches, even witnesses considered uncooperative. Guy Fawkes was racked so thoroughly that his signature on his confession is barely a scribble compared to his normal handwriting. You can still see both documents in the UK National Archives. It's a before and after picture of what the rack does to a human being. Let's talk about what happened if you survived the rack, because this is where the nightmare becomes permanent. Most victims who were stretched significantly never fully recovered. Your joints would never quite fit together correctly again. Walking became a limping shuffle. Victims reported constant, grinding pain in their shoulders and hips for the rest of their lives, pain that 16th century medicine had exactly zero ability to treat. John Gerard, a Jesuit priest who survived the rack in 1597, wrote that even years later, he couldn't hold a quill to write without his hands cramping. His shoulders would dislocate during sleep, and he'd wake up screaming as his body tried to find a comfortable position that no longer existed. He'd been fundamentally reconfigured as a human being. But here's what's genuinely chilling. Many survivors were racked again. All an interrogator had to do was walk a former victim past the rack room, let them hear the creaking wood, and they'd cooperate with anything. It was trauma as a renewable resource. So why did we stop? You might think it's because humanity became more enlightened. You'd be wrong. The rack declined because it stopped being legally necessary. By the late 17th century, European legal systems began shifting toward evidence-based prosecution, not because torture was morally wrong, but because confessions obtained under extreme duress were becoming legally problematic. England officially abolished torture in 1640. By then, torture was becoming embarrassing, not wrong, just unsophisticated. The upper classes were reading philosophy, and it was hard to present yourself as cultured while also professionally pulling people apart. But the rack never really disappeared. It just evolved. The Khmer Rouge in Cambodia used a modified version in the 1970s. Reports from various regimes in the 20th century describe remarkably similar devices. The technology is too simple and too effective to ever truly vanish. So remember that little Wi-Fi complaint from the start? Or the backache you swore was the worst pain ever? Yeah, after hearing what the rack actually did to people, those morning spine pops are sounding pretty amazing. Your joints aren't being torn apart. Your ligaments aren't snapping. You're not being stretched a foot longer by men who think it's morally justified. Which moment hit you hardest? Shoulders separating? Anne Askew's torture? Those cheerful diagrams in the manuals? Drop it in the comments. And if this made you grateful for literally anything in modern life, hit subscribe for more historical nightmares. I'll see you in the next one, where the Iron Maiden turns out to be nothing like you think. Until then, enjoy the simple luxury of standing up whenever you want.